3 days ago, I sat in Warren Keene's office on Main Street in Hawthorne, looked down at the paper in front of me, and laughed hard enough for him to set his pen down and stare at me over the rim of his glasses. It was not a happy laugh. It was what came out when my parents, who had not spoken to me in more than 2 years, finally reached for me through a lawyer because they needed my signature to sell my grandfather Franklin Cross's cabin at Laurel Creek. Warren glanced toward the little fridge in the corner and asked if I needed some water. I shook my head, pressed my hand to the document, and thought, for the first time in years, the truth got here before I had to defend myself. My name is Delaney Cross. I am 35 years old, and I live in Brookhaven, Tennessee, with my husband, Micah Reed. Brookhaven sits just under an hour from Knoxville if traffic behaves, far enough from Hawthorne that I do not have to run into my parents at the pharmacy or hear my last name ricochet off every coffee counter in town. Micah and I have a small white house with a narrow porch, a gravel driveway, and a kitchen window that catches the late afternoon light. He runs Reed Electrical with two guys he trusts. I work as a senior accountant for Blue Ridge Freight Lines, and most days my world is invoices, reconciliations, expense reports, and the quiet satisfaction of making a messy thing line up. It is not glamorous, but it is peaceful. Peaceful was never something handed to me. I built it the slow way, one choice at a time, by learning when to leave, when to stay silent, and when not to walk back through a door just because somebody expected me to. The envelope from Hawthorne Legal Group sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I opened it. Thick cream paper, my name typed neatly, Hawthorne return address. Just seeing Main Street in that corner made my chest go cold. Hawthorne was where I grew up, but it was also where other people always seemed to know my story before I did, usually because someone in my family had already told it for me. My father, Russell Cross, has managed the Hawthorne branch of Cumberland Valley Bank for longer than some marriages last. People trust him on sight. He wears pressed button-downs, keeps his voice level, and has a way of looking at people that makes them feel he is doing them a favor by staying calm. My mother, Kathleen Cross, runs half the volunteer schedule at First Baptist Hawthorne and the women's Bible study besides. She never raises her voice. She does not need to. She can do more damage with a soft tone and a hand over her heart than most people can do with a scream. Then there's my younger sister, Piper. Piper is 31 now, old enough to know better and still young enough in everyone else's mind to be rescued. She has always understood the math of our house. Tears counted, panic counted, need counted. Competence did not. If Piper fell apart over piano lessons as a kid, the whole evening shifted around her. If I solved my own problem, my father would nod like that proved something noble and say, "You're the strong one, Lainey. You're fine." I used to think that was praise. It took me years to understand what it really meant. Strong in our family meant low maintenance. It meant she can carry more. It meant we do not have to stop for her. I was the first one in my family to graduate college. May of 2014, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, degree in accounting. I worked while I studied. I covered books, gas, the balance that scholarships missed. My parents said they would be there. Piper said she would too. The morning of graduation, my father called and told me Piper was overwhelmed with her apartment move and needed help. I stood in my tiny off-campus room holding my cap in one hand and my phone in the other while he said it like weather. I still went. I still walked. I still smiled for the photo I took myself afterward with my phone propped on a bench. The only person who called that afternoon sounding like my achievement belonged to me was my grandfather, Franklin Cross. His voice was gravelly and warm, and he told me he was proud of me in a way that made it sound simple, like it had never occurred to him to be anything else. Before he hung up, he said, "I took care of my part already." I did not know what that meant. I met Micah in the early months of 2020 when he was rewiring part of the office building where I was working. He did not flirt much. He did not sell himself. He listened. That was what got me first. When I spoke, he paid attention, as if what I said had weight before it had utility. My family never liked him. My father looked at Micah and saw a man who worked with his hands, which, in Russell Cross language, meant somebody I had chosen beneath my potential. My mother smiled that gentle little smile and asked if electrical work was stable enough long term, the kind of question polite enough to survive in company and sharp enough to draw blood all the same. Still, I married him in the fall of 2021 because by then I knew exactly what steadiness looked like, and I was done mistaking judgment for guidance. Everything finally split open on Christmas Eve in 2023. The house in Hawthorne was packed with relatives, casseroles, coats piled on beds, somebody's football game on too loud in the den. Piper caught me in the kitchen when I was putting ice in a glass and asked for $7,500 to cover a winter order for Piper and Pine, her boutique. It was not the first time she had called something a temporary bridge. There had been smaller asks before, always wrapped in family language, always forgotten once the emergency passed. I told her no. That was it. Calm voice, no lecture, no accusation, just no, and this time you need to handle it yourself. She went back into the living room with shiny eyes and a trembling mouth. My father stood from his recliner before anyone even asked what happened. What kind of sister leaves her family hanging like that? He said it loud enough for every fork and glass to go still. My mother leaned toward one of my aunts and said, just soft enough to travel. Ever since she married Micah, she hasn't been herself. Nobody looked surprised. That was the part I remember most. Not the words, the familiarity of the silence around them. Micah was already reaching for our coats when I turned toward the front door. In the car, I stared through the windshield for a full minute before I said, I do not think I can keep walking into that house like none of this is real. Micah started the engine. If you have to be the reasonable one every single time just to stay welcome, then that place was never built for you. After that, I stopped calling. I stopped texting. They did not reach out either, not once. More than 2 years passed like that. Then the letter came. Inside was a formal notice from Warren Keene stating that his office was preparing documents tied to the sale of my grandfather's cabin on Laurel Creek near Norris Lake. Attached was a preliminary quitclaim deed, my name typed cleanly at the bottom, a place for my signature, language releasing any present or future claim so the buyer could move toward closing without unnecessary delay. I read it twice, then a third time. They had gone silent for more than 2 years. No apology, no conversation, no attempt at repair. And the first time they came back into my life, they came through a lawyer because they wanted me to sign away the only place that had ever felt like mine. I set the papers on the kitchen counter and looked up at the old tackle box Franklin used to keep in his truck. It had been sitting on the top shelf since the summer he died. I had not touched it in years, but I knew exactly what was inside. The nausea did not come from the legal language. It came from how small the whole thing was made to sound. A routine matter, a clean signature, a family property moving to the next practical step. That was the Cross family talent. They could turn a knife into paperwork and then look offended if you bled on the carpet. I stood there in my kitchen with Warren Keene's letter under one hand and the tackle box under the other, and all I could think was that Hawthorne had probably already heard some version of this before I did. In that town, stories moved faster than weather, and my parents had always known how to get theirs out first. It started only a few weeks after Christmas of 2023. Raina Bishop was the one who let me know. She's my cousin on my mother's side, and the only person from Hawthorne who never treated my silence like a crime. She texted me first. You okay if I ask something awkward? I called her from the break room at Blue Ridge Freight Lines. The vending machine was humming behind me, and someone in dispatch was arguing with a driver down the hall. What happened, Raina? A pause. Then her voice, careful and flat. Your mom's been telling people she's worried about you. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. Worried how? Like you pulled away after you got married, like you're not yourself, like Micah is a bad influence without actually saying those words. I let out a laugh that did not sound like one. Of course she did. Raina kept going. Your dad's doing his version too. Real calm, real concerned. He told 2 people at the bank he just wants you at peace because you haven't been reacting like yourself. That phrase hit me harder than it should have. Haven't been reacting like yourself, as if the problem was not what they had done, but the fact that I had stopped responding in the familiar way. Raina lowered her voice. Nobody's calling you a bad person, Laney. That's what makes it worse. They're making it sound like something is wrong with you. That was exactly how Hawthorne worked. No one needed to say I was unstable, they just had to look sad enough while they said they were worried. After that call, I started noticing the shape of it everywhere. A woman from church who used to hug me too long at holiday events sent me a message saying if I ever needed to talk, she was there, no judgment. Della Pierce at the coffee shop on Main did not say anything unkind the one time I stopped in for gas and coffee on my way through town, but she looked at me with the kind of caution people wear when they think they're missing part of a story. My old supervisor from the tax prep office called one evening and spoke in that stretched, careful tone people use when they are trying to locate damage without stepping in it. Just checking on you, honey. Your mom sounded concerned. I sat at my kitchen table that night after I hung up and realized my parents had done something almost elegant in its cruelty. They had not turned me into a villain, they had turned me into a question mark. A woman people should approach gently, a daughter who had changed, a wife maybe under too much influence, someone to discuss in lowered voices over chicken salad at church. And the worst part was how believable it all sounded, if you did not know them. Micah came in while I was staring at my phone. He set a coil of wire on the sideboard, washed his hands, and looked at my face. Who called? Marcy from the old office? That bad? Worse, polite. He dried his hands and came over. What did she want? To make sure I'm okay, because apparently everyone back home is deeply committed to my emotional wellness now. Micah leaned one hip against the table. Your mom again? And my dad. They're not calling me difficult, they're calling me fragile, which is smarter. He nodded once. It is. Makes anybody defending you sound insensitive. Exactly. That conversation should have faded with time. Instead, by the spring of 2024, it had settled into the background of my life like low static, not loud enough to confront, not quiet enough to forget. Then, 2 nights after Warren's letter arrived, Raina called again. This time, she did not bother with the warm-up. This isn't just about family drama, Laney. It's money. I sat down at the kitchen counter. What kind of money? Piper and Pine is in trouble, real trouble. Rent's behind. Darlene Fox sent a final notice. I glanced toward the front window. Micah's truck was pulling into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the hedge. How bad? Bad enough that your dad stepped in months ago. He co-signed a business line for Piper, and sometime last year, he opened a HELOC on the house in Hawthorne. I held the phone tighter. On their house? Mid last year, from what I heard, he's been floating that store longer than anyone knew. Nothing in me felt surprised. It was almost worse than surprise. It felt familiar. Of course Russell Cross would mortgage one roof to keep another one from falling on paper. Raina exhaled softly. I didn't want to tell you this unless I had to, but he's talking like that cabin sale is a done deal, like it's just paperwork now. I looked down at Warren's letter again. The wording came back sharper the second time around. It did not say my father had a perfect title and was generously informing me. It said the office was preparing documents for an anticipated sale and requested a release of any current or future claim so the buyer could proceed without avoidable complications. I work with numbers and records for a living. I spend my days around things that look polished until you pull one line and realize the whole stack beneath it is soft. Polite paper means nothing if the premise feeding it is rotten. Reno was still talking. He told Aunt Cheryl you'll sign, said you don't even use the place anymore, and when something is really about family, you always come around. I went very still. That sentence was not about the cabin. It was about the role they had assigned me before I ever understood I had one. The daughter who could absorb, the daughter who would bend, the daughter who would keep the room from cracking. I thought about Laurel Creek then, not the real estate version, not the way a buyer might see timber, water access, rental value, and square footage. I thought about the screen door that never shut quietly, the chipped enamel kettle Franklin used every summer morning, the smell of lake water and sawdust in the mudroom. At Laurel Creek, no one ever needed me to be the easy one. Franklin never called me strong when what he meant was self-sufficient enough to neglect. He just treated me like I had already earned a place in the room. Micah came in as I ended the call. He took one look at me, then at the letter on the counter. That bad? Worse. It's Piper's store. Dad's buried in it. He pulled out the chair across from me. And the cabin is the bailout? Looks that way. He sat down and rested his forearms on the table. What do you need? I looked past him to the top shelf, to Franklin's old tackle box with the brass latch worn dull from years of handling. I had packed it up after his funeral in July of 2019. I had moved it with us twice. I had dusted around it without opening it. Inside, tucked under old line spools and rusted hooks, was the cream envelope he had labeled in his own hand. For Delaney, when you need the truth. Micah followed my eyes. You always knew it was there? I nodded. Why didn't you open it? Because if I did, it meant whatever he put in there was final, and right after he died, I couldn't handle one more final thing. Micah let that sit between us. I stood, reached up and brought the box down, carefully, like it was heavier than wood and metal had any right to be. When I set it on the table, the latch clicked softly under my thumb. I pulled out the envelope and laid it beside Warren Keene's letter. On one side was my family trying to legalize taking the last thing they thought I would hand over if they pushed hard enough. On the other was something Franklin had left behind years earlier, as if he already knew there would come a day when comfort would not be enough, and what I would need instead was the truth. I slid my thumb under the seal before I could talk myself out of it. Micah stayed where he was, on the other side of the kitchen, leaning one shoulder against the counter, giving me exactly the kind of room that never once existed in the house where I grew up. He did not ask if I was sure. He did not say, take your time. He was just there, solid and quiet, while I opened the one thing I had been avoiding since July of 2019. Inside were two items folded together. The first was a short, handwritten letter on lined paper, Franklin's neat block print slanting slightly to the right. The second was a stack of legal documents on heavier paper, clipped at the corner, organized in the way only an older man who trusted paperwork more than memory would organize something that mattered. I saw the words irrevocable trust agreement before I even sat down, then trust property schedule, then deed transfer with a county stamp from Campbell County. Not planned, not in progress, done. I lowered myself into the kitchen chair and unfolded Franklin's letter first. Delaney, if you are reading this, it means you finally need the truth more than you need peace. That first line alone was enough to make my throat tighten. The rest was short, but there was not a wasted word in it. Franklin wrote that my father had always had a blind side where Piper was concerned, and that blind side had cost more than money. He wrote that I had spent most of my life being called strong by people who really meant convenient. Then he wrote the sentence that sat in my chest like something unlocked. You are not imagining this. When a person learns to carry more than her share, other people start calling it normal. I put the page down for a second and stared at the grain of the table, because if I kept reading without stopping, I thought I might break in a way that would take too long to recover from. Micah moved then, slow enough not to startle me, and set my water glass a little closer. You okay? No. He nodded once. That sounded about right. I picked the letter back up. Franklin wrote that the cabin at Laurel Creek was never meant to become emergency money for choices I had not made. He wrote that he knew exactly how family stories got rewritten once the right person died and the wrong people were left holding the room. He said he had taken care of it in advance. Then, in one of the final lines, he wrote that he had transferred the cabin into trust during his lifetime and named me sole beneficiary because he did not intend to leave one more thing in my life at the mercy of whoever needed me to yield. I read the letter twice. Then I set it in my lap and looked at the legal documents. There it was, in black and white. A recorded deed transfer placing the Laurel Creek cabin into the Franklin Cross Irrevocable Trust before his death in 2019. A property schedule listing the parcel cleanly, signature pages, notary seals, recording information, all of it neat, dated, closed. I do not know how long I sat there before Micah came around the table and crouched beside me. Say something. I laughed once, but quietly this time. It wasn't the cabin. He looked up at me. What do you mean? I swallowed. It's not that the cabin is mine, it's that he knew. He knew what they would do. Micah rested his forearms on his knees and waited. I spent years thinking maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I took things too personally. Maybe I made too much out of the way they always chose Piper first. And he saw it. He saw it clearly enough to do this before I even knew I'd need it. That was the part that undid me. Not the property, not the money, the fact that someone in that family had looked at the pattern and named it correctly before I ever had the language to. I did not sob, I did not collapse. I just sat there with the papers in my lap and felt the pressure under my ribs shift for the first time in years. Then I moved. I called Samuel Voss before I could think too hard about whether the number in Franklin's old address book would still be good. It rang twice. Samuel Voss? Mr. Voss, this is Delaney Cross, Franklin Cross's granddaughter. A short pause, then a softer voice. Delaney, I was wondering when you might call. That sentence made my skin prickle. You knew about this. Your grandfather asked me to be ready if you ever needed the file. Have you opened the envelope? I looked down at the papers spread across my kitchen table. I have. Good. Then let me save you some time. The trust is valid. It has been valid since before your grandfather passed. The cabin was transferred into the trust during his lifetime. It did not pass through probate, and your father has no authority to sell it. Just hearing another person say it out loud changed the air in the room. You still have the originals. I do. I also have certified copies, the trust schedule, and a trustee letter if this is moving in an unpleasant direction. It already is. That didn't surprise him. He made a sound deep in his throat, not quite a sigh. I can email you a complete packet tonight. If the other attorney wants confirmation, I'll provide it. I thanked him, ended the call, and opened my laptop before the emotion had time to turn back into paralysis. This was the part of me Blue Ridge Freight Lines paid for. Not law, pattern, sequence, record. I pulled county records, searched parcel history, confirmed the recording date on the deed transfer, cross-checked the probate docket from Franklin's estate, and lined up the tax parcel history. There was no gap for Russell to slide through, no handoff, no silent reversion, no technical angle that turned this into shared family property by accident. Micah set a plate beside me sometime around 9, and I ate half of it without looking up. You're in work mode. I clicked into another county record. I'm in don't let them get 1 inch mode. That sounds healthier than panic. It is. By 10:30, my inbox chimed with Samuel's packet. Everything was there. Clean, organized, dated. It had the calm force of a man who had expected this fight years ago and done his homework then. My phone rang just after that. "Raina, tell me you're sitting down." I looked at the papers covering my table. I am literally surrounded by documents. What happened? Darlene Fox gave Piper until Monday. No extension, no sympathy. If she doesn't pay, she's out. I closed my eyes. So the store is really that bad. It's worse. Your dad's upside down, Laney. Someone told Naomi the business line he backed is around $228,000, and that's before the HELOC from last spring. I stared through the dark kitchen window toward nothing I could see. That was the number then. That was the fire. "No wonder they didn't call to apologize," I said. "No wonder they didn't invite me to coffee and pretend they missed me." Raina was quiet for a beat. "They don't need reconciliation, they need cash." That was the sentence that finally settled everything into place. After I got off the phone, I pulled Warren Keene's letter back in front of me and read it again, slower this time. With the trust documents spread beside it, I could see exactly where the confidence stopped and the assumption began. Warren had not written that Russell held indisputable title. He had written like a transactional lawyer moving a file toward closing, trying to clear possible claims before anyone slowed the deal down with questions. That made him careless, maybe, but not all-knowing. It meant he was operating inside the story Russell had given him. I picked up my phone and called the number on the letterhead. "Hawthorne Legal Group? This is Delaney Cross. I received Mr. Keene's packet regarding Laurel Creek. I have some questions before I decide whether I'm signing anything." A brief hold, then Warren himself came on, crisp and polite. "Miss Cross, of course. We can discuss the claim release and where the transaction stands. Would Friday morning work? Does 10 o'clock work for you? It does. Good. I'll see you then." He did not say title. He did not say ownership. He stayed exactly where his letter had stayed, inside procedure. That told me everything I needed to know. When I called Samuel back and told him about the meeting, he asked if I wanted him there in person. "No, not at first." "You're certain?" "Yes. I want to walk into that room myself. If I need you, I want you on the phone and ready." "You'll have me." After I hung up, Micah disappeared into the hallway and came back with a slim black folder and a clean legal pad. He slid them across the table with a thermos. "Coffee for the drive? Folder so your father can't pretend you came in unprepared." I looked at him. "You really thought this through. You married an electrician, not an idiot." That got a real laugh out of me. By midnight, the table was arranged in 3 clean stacks: Franklin's handwritten letter, the trust documents, the county copies, and probate record. I sat there looking at all of it, then lifted Franklin's letter and set it slightly apart from the rest. The documents would get me through the meeting on Friday, but the thing that would let me walk into that room standing straight was not the cabin. It was the sentence I had waited my whole life to hear. "You are not imagining this." Friday morning came cold and bright, the kind of East Tennessee morning that made every roofline look too sharp. I left Brookhaven just after 8 with Samuel Voss's packet in a slim black folder on the passenger seat and Micah's thermos in the cup holder. He kissed my forehead before I went, pressed the coffee into my hand, and said only one thing: "Call if you need me." I drove north with the heater low and my jaw tight. The farther I got from home, the more familiar everything became in ways I hated. The church steeple at First Baptist Hawthorne rising over the bare trees, Della Pierce's trafe with the painted mugs in the window, the branch of Cumberland Valley Bank where my father had spent years becoming the kind of man people trusted on sight. By the time I turned onto Main Street, I had that old feeling again, like the town had already heard something about me and I was arriving late to my own trial. Warren Keene's office sat above a dental practice, same red brick, same narrow stairs, same smell of old carpet and stale coffee I remembered from years ago when Franklin handled property tax questions there. Gloria Whitcomb was at the front desk in a pale blue sweater, lacking reading glasses low on her nose. When I gave my name, her face shifted just a little too slowly. "Good morning, Miss Cross." Morning. She gestured toward the hallway. Mr. Keene is ready for you. I followed her past framed diplomas and a potted ficus that had seen better days. Warren met me outside the conference room, hand already half extended, lawyer smile in place. Miss Cross, I appreciate you coming in. I stepped inside and stopped. My father was already seated at the far end of the table, hands folded, posture perfect, a legal pad in front of him like this was a bank meeting he intended to run. For 1 second, I just looked at Warren. I thought this was a meeting with your office. Warren adjusted his tie. I believed Mr. Cross's presence might move things along. Of course you did. I sat down anyway, not beside my father, but across from him. I placed my folder on the table and left it closed. Russell gave me the same measured expression he used for customers asking for more than policy allowed. Delaney. I didn't answer the name. He leaned back slightly. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. That line had done a lot of work in my life. It always meant the same thing. Do what we want, and everyone gets to keep pretending they're decent. Warren cleared his throat and looked between us. As I explained in my letter, this is simply about clearing any future claim risk so an anticipated sale can proceed without complications. An anticipated sale? I repeated. Of what? Russell's mouth tightened at that, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he didn't like being made to say it plainly. The Laurel Creek cabin. I kept my eyes on him. And where does the money go? His tone stayed smooth. Delaney, the cabin has been sitting unused for years. It needs work. There's a serious buyer prepared to move quickly. Piper needs bridge capital to stabilize the store and catch up with vendors. This is a practical solution. Bridge capital. He made it sound like weatherproofing. I looked at Warren. So that's what this is. Not family property being responsibly managed. A bailout. Russell's voice sharpened by half a degree. It is family being protected. By selling the one thing tied to my grandfather that none of you have touched in years. Russell spread one hand like a patient man dealing with emotion. No one is attacking your memories. This is about making smart choices with assets. I heard myself laugh softly. You haven't called me in over 2 years, but now suddenly we're talking about smart choices with assets? He shifted his focus back to me fully. We left the door open. You chose silence. My phone number never changed. You made everything difficult after you married Micah. There it was, not even subtle. I looked down at his hands, still folded, still clean, and thought how often my father had hidden a knife in the language of concern. Difficult, how? He exhaled through his nose. You pulled away. You became closed off, defensive. Micah has not helped. Warren glanced at him, then at me. The room had started to tilt in a way I don't think he'd anticipated. I folded my hands over the top of my folder. So your position is that I stopped being cooperative enough. Russell gave me a look that used to make me feel 16. Don't do that. Do what? Translate? His phone buzzed on the table before he could answer. He glanced at the screen and picked it up quickly, turning half away. Yes? Piper's voice spilled through clear enough anyway. Did she sign it? Dad, Darlene said Monday is it. She will literally change the locks. Russell lowered his voice. I'm handling it. But Piper was already rushing on. Then just tell her it's for family. She always folds when you say that. The air in the room changed all at once. Russell pulled the phone from his ear and ended the call. He did not look at me. Warren did. Really looked this time. I opened my folder. The trust agreement went down first, then the recorded deed transfer, then Samuel Voss's trustee letter and the county copies beneath it. I slid them toward Warren and left my hand there for a moment so they wouldn't fan apart. You don't need me to release a claim. I need you to cover the fact that my father never had the authority to sell that cabin in the first place. Nobody moved. Warren picked up the top document. scanned the first page, then the second. His eyes caught on the recording stamp. He flipped farther, slower now. By the time he reached the trust property schedule, the temperature in his face had changed. Russell leaned forward. "What is that?" "That is the paperwork showing he never had the authority to sell it." Warren set the papers down carefully. "Mr. Cross, were you aware your father transferred Laurel Creek into an irrevocable trust before his death?" Russell looked at me instead of him. "Where did you get this?" "Franklin left it for me." "That's impossible." Warren was already reaching for his phone. "I'm going to call Mr. Voss." Samuel answered on speaker after 2 rings. Warren identified himself and asked the question directly. Samuel's voice came through calm and flat as old stone. "Yes, the trust is valid. Yes, the deed transfer was recorded during Franklin Cross's lifetime. Yes, Laurel Creek is trust property. No, Russell Cross does not have unilateral authority to convey it. Yes, Delaney Cross is the sole beneficiary." Warren thanked him, ended the call, and sat back. "The preliminary quitclaim I sent is not appropriate in light of these documents. Any further movement on this transaction needs to stop until title authority is correctly addressed." Russell's face had gone a shade lighter. "If this cabin doesn't sell, Piper loses the store. You know that, don't you? Your mother and I are exposed on this. The line, the house, all of it." For one dangerous second, I felt the old pull, the old training. If you can fix it, you should. Then I looked at the trust papers again and remembered Franklin's handwriting. "You made those choices, not me. Laurel Creek was never your emergency fund." Warren closed the folder nearest him. "I think it's best we end here for today." I gathered my documents, stood, and left without looking back. My hands shook only once when I reached the stairwell and pushed open the heavy door. I was halfway to Brookhaven when Raina called. "You're not going to believe this." "Try me." "They didn't go home. Your parents and Piper drove straight to Laurel Creek." I gripped the wheel tighter. "What?" Raina's voice dropped. "They deleted the picture after a few minutes, but people saw it." Of course they did. I ended the call in silence and drove the rest of the way home with my folder beside me and my father's panic still ringing in my ears. When I walked into the kitchen, Micah looked up from the sink. "Well?" I set the folder on the table. "They don't have a clean legal path anymore." He dried his hands slowly. "So now what?" I thought of the porch at Laurel Creek, of Piper framing herself in front of a place she had never once loved until it became useful. "Now they do what they've always done," I said. "They take up space long enough and loudly enough that everyone starts to think it was theirs all along." Micah looked at me for a long second, then reached for his phone. "You calling Samuel?" I nodded. He answered on the second ring, and if he was surprised, he hit it well. "Mr. Voss," I said. "They drove straight to Laurel Creek." A quiet breath on the line. Then, we moved to the next clean step. That was one of the things I liked about Samuel. He never confused drama with urgency. He explained exactly what he intended to do. As trustee, he would issue a formal demand letter requiring Russell, Kathleen, and Piper to vacate trust property immediately. If they ignored it, he could move for civil enforcement. He did not say handcuffs. He did not say police. He said occupancy, notice, compliance, record. The language was dry and sturdy, which was exactly what I needed. "I don't want this turned into a circus," I told him. "I don't want them humiliated for sport. I just want them out." "Then that is what we will do," Samuel said. "And the cleaner we keep it, the less room they have to perform." By the next morning, the letters had gone out certified and by email. A copy went to Warren Keene as well, which I appreciated more than I expected. I did not need him on my side. I only needed him unable to pretend he did not know. Piper deleted her post fast, but not before somebody in the family had taken screenshots. Raina sent one to me without comment. There was Piper on the porch in a cream sweater, one hand on the rail like she was staging a fall catalog. Russell stood behind her with that same composed face he wore at the bank. Kathleen held a travel mug and looked out toward the lake like she was the long-suffering keeper of family memory. Under the photo, a cousin had written, "So glad y'all are back where you belong." Nobody asked where I was. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. Kathleen called at 6:45 the next morning, early enough that the room was still gray. I was awake, but had not moved yet. Micah turned his head on the pillow when he heard my phone vibrate against the nightstand. "You gonna answer that?" "Yes." I took the call sitting on the edge of the bed. "Laney." Her voice sounded scraped raw, but with my mother I had learned a long time ago that damage and performance could wear the same dress. "Please, your father didn't sleep all night." I waited. "Piper is beside herself. This is tearing the family apart." I looked toward the window, at the bare February trees in the yard. She still had not said cabin. She still had not said, "Your grandfather made his decision." She still had not said, "I'm sorry." "Mom," I said, very calmly, "you didn't lose me the day I refused to sign that paper." Silence. "You lost me when you went around Hawthorne telling people something was wrong with me because I stopped being useful to you." Her breath caught hard in the receiver. "Delaney, that is not fair." "It's exact." Another silence, longer this time. "Your grandfather would have never wanted this," she said at last. "My grandfather did want this. That's why he left paperwork instead of prayers." I ended the call before she could rearrange herself into the victim again. The next few days unfolded the way numbers do when you have delayed them too long. Quietly at first, then all at once. Warren informed the buyer's side there was a title issue requiring immediate review. That was enough. Tanner Holt pulled out before the weekend was over. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know how it went. Investment buyers do not like surprises, and they like family land disputes even less. Without the sale, Piper's timelines collapsed. Darlene Fox gave her until Monday, just like she said she would. By Tuesday morning, Piper and Pine was locked up, with a printed notice taped inside the glass. Rena drove by and called me from the parking lot. "It's done," she said. "Lights off. Rack by the front still half full." I closed my office door at Blue Ridge and sat down slowly. For a second, I felt something like triumph rise up, then disappear just as fast. That store was a bad idea, propped up by family money and denial, but it was still my sister's collapse. Satisfaction would have been easier than what I actually felt, which was mostly tired. Russell tried to plug the hole the way men like him always do. Sell something, pull from retirement, pretend the structure is still stable if you move enough weight around quickly. He sold his old pickup, the one he had driven for years. He pulled a portion of his retirement early. It eased the pressure on the guarantee, but not enough to erase the damage. The HELOC on the house in Hawthorne still sat there like a weather system waiting to break. In a town like Hawthorne, none of that stays private for long. People started asking different questions than the ones my parents had wanted asked. If I was so unstable, why were the county records in my favor? If Russell was simply trying to manage family property, why had a lawyer pulled back so abruptly? Nobody called me a hero. That would have been absurd. But the room they had built for me in other people's minds started to crack. Pastor Elaine sent a short message one afternoon. "Thinking of you and hoping you are well." No apology, just a shift. Naomi Briggs called 3 nights later. We had not spoken properly in over a year. "I should have said something that Christmas," she told me. "I knew your mother was out of line, and I sat there anyway." I thanked her, because she had at least managed to say the plain thing. Not everyone came around. Juno still posted vague comments about loyalty and blood on Facebook for another week. A few relatives went quiet in the way people do when truth becomes inconvenient, but they are not ready to choose against comfort. I let them. I had spent too much of my life chasing clarity from people committed to blur. Micah and I waited 4 full days after Samuel confirmed Laurel Creek was empty before we drove out there. The cabin sat exactly where it always had, close enough to the water that the cold carried a wet mineral smell up through the trees. From the outside, it looked untouched. Inside, it was worse. Clean, but wrong. Someone had wiped the counters, the dish towel by the sink was folded differently, a chair at the table sat at a different angle. There were no broken things, no vandalism, nothing dramatic enough to point at, just the unmistakable feeling that they had stood in my grandfather's rooms and behaved as if their need outweighed my memory. On the kitchen table sat a single key and a folded note in Russell's handwriting. I opened it and read one line. I never thought my father would go around me like that. That was all. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done, just wounded authority, as if the greatest offense here was not that he tried to sell something that wasn't his, but that another man had once denied him power over it. I folded the note and slid it into my coat pocket. Micah had already gone out to the porch with a screwdriver and a replacement switch plate he had brought from the truck. He looked back over his shoulder. You all right? I think so. You want coffee first or work first? Work, I said. Coffee after. That was how we began putting the place back where it belonged. He fixed the porch light and tightened a loose switch in the hallway. I opened windows, shook out old rugs, and reset the kitchen one drawer at a time. In the garage, I found one of Franklin's old toolboxes, and beneath it, a weathered photo box. The first picture I pulled out was me at 6 years old on the dock, holding a fish with both hands, grinning so wide I looked like a different species of girl. Franklin stood behind me, smiling with his hat pushed back on his head. I sat down on the concrete floor and stared at that picture until my eyes burned. He did not leave me a cabin, not really. He left me proof that at least one person in my family looked at me and not seen obligation, resilience, or a convenient daughter-shaped solution to everyone else's problems. He just saw me. Later that evening, I wrote a letter to Russell and Kathleen at the kitchen table by the same window where Franklin used to keep a jar of red and white bobbers. The cabin will not be sold. If there is any version of a relationship left to be built, it does not begin with paperwork, money, or the word family used like a crowbar. It begins with the truth. I did not ask them to change overnight. I did not offer forgiveness I did not feel. I only told them that the door was no longer locked by guilt, but it would never again open just because someone needed me soft enough to step through. I mailed it the next morning and did not wait for a reply. That Friday, exactly 1 week after the meeting in Warren Keene's office, I sat on the dock at Laurel Creek with Franklin's old fishing rod across my knees. I did not bait the hook, I did not cast, I just sat there, listening to the water move against the pilings, and thought about that phone call after my college graduation in 2014. I took care of my part already. Back then, I thought he meant a card, maybe some money tucked in an envelope. What he had really done was far more lasting than that. He had looked ahead into a future where I would be doubted, used, and rewritten, and he had left me something stronger than comfort. He had left me the truth. If you have ever had someone in your own family tell your story wrong, I would love to know what you would put in a letter to the person who saw you the least clearly. And if stories like this mean something to you, stay with me. There are more ahead.